Next up, we have Betsy McFarland, who's going to talk about keeping pets in their homes. Welcome, Betsy.
Well, hello again. How's everybody doing? Yesterday I was the first one, so no, you weren't quite caffeinated, and now I'm right before lunch. So now I got to figure out a way to really keep you going and with me for the next 30 minutes or so. Doing a time check here, it's 11:20. Okay, so we're going to talk, oops, that was not supposed to come up yet. We are going to talk about some innovative ideas and some things, particularly I'm seeing organizations in the United States do to help to keep pets in their homes and out of shelters. And I think some other speakers may have covered this. I think there was someone yesterday who I had to miss. I was so disappointed, who she may have shared a little bit of this, but I'm hoping I can share a few new ideas with you and talk about some of the issues that are causing pets to lose their homes and maybe some options for what we may be able to do about it. So first, I just wanted to take stock a little bit. Yesterday I shared with you that, in the United States at least, shelter euthanasia has declined from about 30 to 40 years ago in the upwards of 15 million cats and dogs every year, down to 3 million. And the primary reason for that huge achievement has been, as I mentioned yesterday, widespread spaying and neutering. It was a pretty simple fix. There were just litters of puppies and kittens crowding shelters throughout the United States. Now that we've kind of hit all that low-hanging fruit, right? Spay-neuter is really common for the most part. Lots of people are doing it. Veterinarians are promoting it. We've kind of hit that. And so a lot of times, and the reasons that animals end up in shelters or the challenges we have, they're getting a little more complex. And John was just talking about that. I think the closer and closer we are getting to zero, the more challenging it's going to become. But it's not bad news, because there's also still a lot of really simple things that can help people keep their pets who otherwise wouldn't be able to. And we want to, kind of face it that sometimes pets aren't always the easiest little buggers to live with. And, as animal people, I think we have a very high threshold for what we will tolerate for the pets in our homes, whereas the people in our community may not. This is my dog, Berkeley, and he's actually just yawning in this picture, but I like to think he's more of a dinosaur. He's a wonderful, sweet dog, but he is dog reactive, and I have to manage that pretty darn carefully. I think there aren't a lot of people who would want to put up with that. Thankfully, Berkeley is actually quite a sweet, loving boy, and he's ruled by 4 crazy-ass cats. And, I think it's funny because, cats have a, pretty good reputation, right? How many of you are familiar with Simon's cat? I love Simon's cat. Okay, I could just watch these all day long. But it's funny because, cats kind of get this reputation. And all I can say is in my house, it's kind of true. I don't know if I just have the worst cats or what. I mean, I love them dearly. I let them do anything. But, there's one who shreds the furniture. There's 3 who work together to open the treat cabinet. Not joking. They actually work to open the treat cabinet. They knock my jigsaw puzzles off the table. They sit in it and bust it. And the last picture kind of in the corner, actually, I don't know if you can really see very well over there, but that's glass all over my floor. That just happened like 2 weeks ago when they knocked over my wine glass. So I was relaxing doing a puzzle at night. So I think that, sometimes folks just really don't understand kind of what some of these underlying behaviors are, what some of the simple things they are could do. And there are times where I think Berkeley has said this to my cats. And just to sum up my own animals, this is my cat whose name is actually Lucifer. And you can see he wears a skull and crossbones tag on his collar. So I feel like I should get an award for keeping all my animals. So when you think about and look at what's causing pets to lose their homes in your own communities, what are you seeing? And I think in the US and in Australia, from everything I've read online and from talking with a lot of you here, I think the reasons are very similar. But, I think it's important to be able to track these reasons. How many of you are actually tracking the reasons animals are surrendered? A few. But being able to track and see patterns in what's happening can really help you to implement some solutions. I mean, Jan mentioned it earlier, what gets measured gets managed, right? And so I think if we can have a better sense of what the quantity is of the pets that are coming in and the reasons why, it might help you to identify some preventative measures for kind of your biggest buckets of issues. Just a tip that we'll kind of get into a little further a little more depth as we go today. So in the US, these are some of the common reasons pets are relinquished to shelters. Does this sound familiar to you? Yeah, landlord issues rank very high, and I'm going to talk about that because we're trying some new things with our organization in the US. Actually, it's launching tomorrow to try and help address some of those issues. But behavior problems, not being able to afford the animal, litter box issues, as Tris was trying to help us with earlier. So a lot of folks actually do try to resolve the issues that are impacting their pets in their homes, and they do see the shelter usually as a last result, but they're still filling up our shelters, right? And that can be a challenge for all of us, and we want to prevent that as much as we can. And then, of course, you have the periodic one that just makes you scratch your head. He doesn't match the furniture. How many of you heard that? You've probably heard something like that. I think a lot of times there's probably something else going on there that you could be helping them with, perhaps how to keep your dog off the furniture, perhaps. But when you get a call like that, it kind of makes us a little ballistic. I just had to find a way to ease this in here because I love this. This picture cracks me up. I know, thankfully you guys don't have a lot of gun ownership in Australia, but this resonates very much with Americans. And it can be frustrating dealing with life's problems or things that seem so simplistic, so solvable, and someone's dropping their pet off at your front door. But I want to lend you a little bit of hope. And I shared some of these statistics the other day with our full session, but I want to share these with you all because I think it's important to keep this in mind. At least in the United States, and again, I think it's relatively similar to here, 2/3 of American households have pets. 83 million dogs and 95 million cats are living in homes in the US. And we spend $61 billion a year on our pets. When you take into account veterinary care, food, basic necessities, toys, $61 billion a year. That's a pretty big investment in our pet population. 72% of Americans consider their pets to be part of their family. When they're surveyed, they consider them to be a family member. And more than half sleep in bed with their owners. Isn't that great? That's great. But because of the work that we do, I think we tend to see the harder situations, or the situations where, the failed situations, I guess I should say, not necessarily harder, but more of the failed ones. And I think it helps to keep some perspective that, if you look in total, there's 144 million dogs and cats living in homes in the United States. And in our animal shelters, we see about 6 to 8 million. So when you think about it, that's less than 6% of all dogs and cats in the United States entering our shelters every year. So that's hopeful, right? I mean, so it's easy to lose perspective when day after day you are in the shelter or you are working the front desk and you're doing animal control and you see the challenges and the problems. But I just wanted to kind of lend you a little bit of hope and talk about how it actually is a little better than we often think it might be. But it still doesn't mean we don't need the safety nets. And we want to prevent those animals from going into the shelter as much as possible. So I'd like to share a couple of programs that we're seeing in the US having some success and talk about a few of the key issues causing pets to lose their homes in a little more depth. But an easy way, or that there are a lot of different opportunities for you to intervene with people who are at risk for surrendering, right? And it's really every touch point you have with your public and with your community. Whether you're doing door-to-door outreach like we do through Pets for Life, or your animal control officers are in the field like Todd was talking about yesterday, or if you even just have a helpline where people can call and say, have a problem or question. Or even when they're coming in to surrender a pet, it might not be too late to help them change their mind and give them lend them some of your own hope and help them overcome what's causing their problem. And one just very easy thing to do, I would encourage all of you to do if you don't, is take a look at your website or see what's coming up. What are people looking for? If someone's out there saying, I have a litter box problem, and they may not think to call you, or they even look at your website to see what you offer, they may be able to help themselves and solve their own problem if you have some of that information there. And I know Trish was talking a lot about the ASPCA virtual behaviorist, which is a fabulous resource, and I put it up here again for you. It's aspcabehavior.org, where she said that you can download all those tip sheets, and they have them on dogs and cats, and you can put your logos on them. And at HSUS, we also have a series of tip sheets. I think they're very complimentary, but we may have some others that you want to take a look at. So you can look at them, and we feel free to just take the information. We'd appreciate it if you just say, from the Humane Society of the United States, but I don't care, frankly. If you want to just take it and put your own logo on it, please do it. Anything you can do to arm your public and your community with information that might help them help themselves is always the lowest hanging fruit we can get to, right? And so another option is doing some helplines. How many of you actually advertise a helpline? Does anyone do that here? Okay. So this is something to consider. A lot of the shelters in the United States have started to do this over the last many years, and having some success. Nevada Humane Society in Reno, Nevada, they started a helpline in, I think it was 2008, and kind of trained volunteers and staff how to handle the most common calls they would expect to receive, whether it was a cat not using the litter box or a landlord challenge or whatever it was. They kind of looked at what are the most common things, kind of created the scripts of how to help people walk through the issues and just be that voice on the other end of the line to help see if we could talk them through the problem and keep the pet where the pet was living. And they had really great success. First, they had 20,000 calls and emails every year. That's a lot, and it's a little daunting to think about that, right? That's a little daunting. But here's the good news. In the first year doing the program, their intake reduced by 8%. Just by having someone on the other end of a line who has some information and some expertise who might be able to help you created that kind of change, which I thought was really impressive. And they found, too, that half of the people they spoke with were willing to try something to keep from having to surrender their pet. And this is actually, I put this picture here just to remember to tell you the little bit I read about them. This is actually my cat, Cisco. He's a grown-up now, but I love that picture. And, but like one example of a call that they talked about was a woman who had taken in a kitten, and the kitten kept like aggressively, playing with her arm, doing like the kick thumping and grabbing, like kittens do, right? And she was ready to surrender the kitten. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't handle this boy. And she called, and literally it was like, okay, get out the wand toy, tire him out. And then she ended up having her nephew come over, and they ran around together and played. And then the kitten was tired and well-behaved, and everything was fine, and the kitten stayed in his home. But she didn't know. She had no idea how to handle that. So really simple things sometimes. And it may not work with every situation, right? I mean, we're not going to be able to solve everything, and the animals will still have to come into the shelter. But if we can help solve these, God, how much easier our lives would be, right? And I wanted to share, just because I mentioned the cat issue, and Trish gave you so much great information, we have really invested quite a bit recently in, at our organization, at the Humane Society of the United States, on providing more information and assistance to shelters and rescues who want to help counsel people with cat behavior problems, because that's one of the big challenges, and that's one of the things we see relinquishments happening for quite a bit. And so you can take advantage of these too. They're online. We have a number of different options that I just wanted you to be aware of if you want to write down that web address. One is we have a series of webinars that are all, there's a couple new ones coming out you can listen to live if you want to be up in the middle of the night, because it'll be normal time at home for me. But they're all recorded, so you can kind of watch them at any time you'd like on different approaches to helping to counsel people about cat problems, not just litter boxes, but other cat problems. And rethinking the cat is just a US-based thing, but we have also a cat behavior and retention course. And this is actually for folks like you, not the general public. It's for, so if you wanted to set up a helpline, or you wanted to have a couple of frontlines folks be more informed and have more tools on how to resolve problems with cats, you can send them through this course, and they'll feel much more confident and ready to do that kind of work. So if you'd like to take advantage of it, you are most welcome. And all this stuff is free, so please take advantage of it. But another way to reach people, in addition to doing things like helplines, is obviously out in the community, as I talked about at great length yesterday. And any way that you are impacting, little things can go a long way. Access to desexing is really important, but even small stuff, a flea treatment or just deworming, right? Those things can, even just how to feed the pet properly can help a lot. A lot of people just have no idea, and even some common information about, basic stuff. And I want to tell one brief story that I just love to share, because I think it's a really good example of how information sharing and a little bit of access goes a long way. This is a dog named Rich, and he lives in the Pets for Life community in Charlotte, North Carolina. And they are one of our mentorship communities through Pets for Life. And they met Rich while they were doing door-to-door outreach. And you can see he's got a pretty severe skin condition. It was mange. And when they met his mom, she was saying that she saw him starting to have skin problems, and she didn't know what to do. And as it got worse, she got really worried about him. And she did, actually, even though she lives in a very underserved community, because as we talked about yesterday, that's where Pets for Life really targets, is that very underserved. She did try it. She called vets. She tried to take him to a vet. But the cost that they were quoting her was hundreds of dollars, and she couldn't afford that. So the Pets for Life team was able to just provide some basic mange treatment that we subsidized. And, Rich was greatly improved after a short time on the treatment. And today, he's still with his family, and this is what he looks like. And so while that was an investment, and I like to consider this an investment in prevention, right? That it certainly did cost the Charlotte group some money to provide that mange treatment. But think about what it has saved down the line. It saved that dog from entering the shelter, where then you have to pay for all the cleaning, all the things that John was just talking about you have to contract for. There's a cost to all of that. And there's a cost to society, too. And Rich's mom may have gone out and gotten another dog that also wasn't, neutered, and who knows, right? So, now we've gotten this all set up. We've kept the bond together, and they're thriving. And apparently Charlotte is an area where this is a challenge, because here was another one. Some basic treatment, and the dog was perfectly healthy and stayed with the family. So being out in the community is really helpful. I know maybe not everyone's ready to do that, but even within the shelter itself, there are opportunities. And I love these two programs I'm going to talk about next. This is Home Dog LA, Los Angeles. And they were a rescue group who started the North Shelter Intervention Program. And they based it on another group, which I'm going to talk about next, called Downtown Dog Rescue. And they literally, Carrie Armstrong decided, she was spending so much time doing rescue and taking dogs from shelters who needed to be saved. She decided, what if I flipped and started working on the front end and prevented animals from going in instead? So she shifted gears with what her organization was doing, and she did some homework. She talked to another group who was doing similar work. She pulled together a bunch of tip sheets that we were sharing from ASPCA or whoever she got them from. She created her own set of tip sheets, and she worked out a relationship with a veterinarian to provide at least discounted services to people. And she set up a table in the lobby of the North Central Shelter in Los Angeles. And she was very nervous that first day of opening the doors, not knowing what to expect, being new to all of this. And the first client who came in was a woman named Josephine. And this is her and her 10-year-old dog, a chow mix, named Lucy. And this woman is 80 years old, and she had lived in her apartment for 40 years. And she's had this dog the whole life, 10 years with this dog. Suddenly, the apartment building owners decided to start charging for pet rent, and asked her to pay $200 to keep her dog in the apartment. And unfortunately, Josephine's on a very fixed income, and she couldn't come up with the $200. She walked in the door crying that day, and because Carrie's team was there, they ended up paying the pet fee and sent the dog home. And so Josephine and Lucy got to stay together. That's wonderful, right? And I know a lot of folks will say, well, wait, I don't know if my organization can pay the $200. But here was the best part about this story, is they immediately posted, sorry, I feel like I'm going to say poop. Okay. they posted that story to Facebook and started getting donations immediately. So you can use these stories to raise the money you need to keep doing more of these stories. Little tip. Okay. And how am I doing on time? Okay. Gosh, I'm talking a lot more than I thought I would. Okay, this is Anthony and Cujo, just another great story that I thought I should share with you guys. He also brought his dog in to surrender. His dog was actually picked up. He was coming in to redeem his dog, but he was surprised when he got there to learn it was $67 to get the dog out, which for most of us is probably not that much of an impact, but for him, he could not do that. He was kind of in between his work doing painting on houses and didn't have the money. So they helped make up the difference for what he couldn't pay, and the dog went home, and now he was saying he wants to try to donate to them as soon as he's able. So again, a little thing goes a long way. That's having another group in the lobby being able to kind of help subsidize some of those issues, kept the dog out of the shelter system. And so from their statistics, I wanted to share with you kind of this infographic. So they have so far, since they started doing the program in 2013, prevented 4,000 pets from entering that South Los Angeles shelter. Over 3,600 dogs, over 300 cats, and even 16 rabbits. I'm curious what the rabbit issues are. And then if you look at, on the bottom, there's some of the key reasons, not the key reasons, but either the reasons or what they helped intervene with. So you can see it's a very small percentage of dogs who needed treatment for mange, quite a few, almost a quarter, who couldn't afford their pet, 5% behavioral, over half were spay-neuter, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, almost 8% housing, 6% for euthanasia, which I'm also going to talk about, and then 6% did have to be rescued or rehomed. But think about that. That's amazing that only 6% of all those animals and people that they talked to actually really, truly ended up needing to come into the shelter. Just some of these interventions were able to help prevent that. Another example, Downtown Dog Rescue, which really initiated this effort in Los Angeles, they, again, track, and this is why I mentioned I really encourage you to track all of this, and we'll talk about that in a minute too, is they track all of their interactions and have been tracking their statistics as part of a program that's being supported by Found Animals, which is a foundation and a wonderful organization in the United States in the LA area. And they found that 70% of pet owners who bring their pet to the shelters to surrender actually don't want to give their pet up. They would really like to try to find an alternative if they can, but they felt like this was their only option. And they found that 91% of the people who accepted their services kept the pet. Pretty powerful. Another simple example, dog that ended up being impounded. They paid the redemption fee and sent over someone with some construction skills to mend the fence. Dog never got impounded again. Everybody's happy. Dog's still in the home. So this is just for the Downtown Dogs. They're doing the South Shelter. The other organization I mentioned was doing the North Shelter. But this organization, they've charted out, again, what their services were looking like. Large portion is spay-neuter. A large portion is housing. And a decent amount is, affordability and cost for some of the services that they need. But as you can see, the large majority of pets were able to be kept in their home, and just a small percent rescued. And so I wanted to mention the 33%, and this was pretty consistent between both organizations, people were relinquishing and were able to be keeping their pets simply by offering spay and neuter. And in that area of California and Los Angeles, it's spaying and neutering or desexing is mandatory. And so I think a lot of folks who don't feel like they can comply and pay for the spay-neuter are feeling like they have to give their pet up. And this is why those safety nets become really critical. And it's interesting too, because a lot of times folks think, well, we have free vouchers, so we're gonna pass mandatory spay-neuter, and we'll just offer a free voucher for anyone who can't, if you can't afford to pay for it, as the way to prevent that from happening. But what Downtown Dog has found is that there are owners living in that community who couldn't qualify for the voucher. Undocumented immigrants, people who are there illegally, they couldn't get the voucher. Or even the homeless because they didn't have an address, or if they maybe were in the wrong zip code that wasn't being one that was provided. So it's just something to keep in mind. I think that, and this is partly why I think it's really important to be looking at those statistics and what those reasons for relinquishments are, and maybe reevaluating some of how we're operating. And 8% was for euthanasia, and I just wanted to touch on this briefly because I think it's a really also an important service, because some of the folks who brought those pets in, they were really old or sick animals, and they couldn't afford to go to a veterinarian, and they again felt like they had to, normally would have to just relinquish their pet to shelter. Some do offer euthanasia for pets, but some folks can't afford it, and so by having this kind of intervention, at least they were able to be with their animal while they were euthanized either by the shelter or by a veterinarian. So it's a helpful tool when it's necessary. And 29% had housing problems. So I would like to take a few minutes to talk about housing, because I think this is a big deal. It's a big deal here too, right? Okay. And it's a tough nut to crack sometimes. So let me just check my time, because I know I'm talking more than I thought. Okay, we're good. Okay. So in the U.S., just a few statistics for you. 35% of households rely on rental housing. So about 30 million pets are in rental or rely on rental housing. And in the US, renting is on the rise. Fewer people are owning their homes, more and more are renting. And in homes that are renting, 72% of them have a pet or more than one pet. So it's a large portion of our pet owning public. In Australia, at least from what I could gather doing some internet searching, there are about 65,000 pets surrendered to RSPCA annually over housing issues. That's a lot of animals. And less than 10%, this actually kind of surprised me, because I don't think it's this bad in the US. Less than 10%, I'm pointing at the wrong screen. Okay, less than 10% of all Australian rental properties are listed as pet friendly. Okay, so we got to fix that. Okay, so some of the economic realities, I don't want to beat this to death here, because I know I talk a lot about people in poverty, but at least in the US, 50% of families earn $60,000 or less, and 50 million Americans live in poverty. And so there's a huge issue too in the US with public housing or subsidized housing, it gets very complicated and confusing trying to navigate that, especially for people who have pets. So it ends up coming down to this issue of, do I have my house or my pet? And I know a lot of folks in our movement will often think, well, I'd live in my car before I would ever give my animal up, right? How many of us have thought that or said that? And we want to, right? But it's really difficult for people. These are just some true phone calls that have been handled relating to these issues. One person, I don't know if you can read that, says, "Thank you for calling back. I tried to get back to my old house. It takes 3 hours by bus. I go every other day. Can you help with food for my pet? Hi, I was just at my house. There's no heat or electricity there, and we're staying with someone so my kids can go back to school, but we'll be back there soon unless they tear it down. Can you help me?" And then lastly, "Hi, I'm calling because I've been evicted. I don't know what to do. I have my dog in an abandoned house down the street while I stay at my friend's. Can someone please call me back?" Right? So the challenges are real, but people do go to great lengths to try and keep their pets in a lot of situations. But we kind of make it hard as a society for people to do that. You clearly have all probably at some point tried to rent with a pet. It's not easy. It sounds like it's even harder in Australia, frankly, than in the US. In the US, our biggest challenge is a lot of places are pet friendly, but the way pet friendly is defined is really narrow. It's like if you have a small dog, 25 pounds or under, you can probably have one in the apartment. But, for most of the animals we're trying to place in shelters, there are lots of big dogs, unless you're in Chihuahuaville, that was talked about earlier, there's a lot of big dogs needing homes, and a lot of big dogs lose their homes because rental housing is so hard to find for people who have big dogs. And some of these limits, different limits can be really impactful and hurtful when people are trying to secure housing. Thankfully, the issue is getting more attention, and I recognize some of these ladies in this article that I found when I was Googling about Australia's issues as well. So it's great to be seeing at least being talked about. This was this Australian article here, "Landlords Urge to Open Rentals to Pet Owners." That was just from last week, September 8th. So it's good that I think we have to have this dialogue as a community and as a society about what's happening with people and their pets. But there are some legitimate concerns, and here's kind of where we just have to keep in mind another person's perspective, is some of the landlords' concerns are valid, some of them are not. And it's funny because my team has been doing a lot of research on this issue over the last year. And we have had so many conversations with large landlord rental property owners. We've been reaching out and having a lot of meetings with the different associations who represent rental housing units in the United States, like the National Apartment Association. We've had such great dialogue with these folks, and we're trying to start to crack this nut. And one of the things that they said is like, what can you do about poop? Because that's one of the biggest that's one of the biggest issues that landlord properties get frustrated by, is the mess that people leave behind. So some of this we can fix with some, hopefully by some sharing of information and maybe creative social behavior change advertising. But their primary concerns are damage to the property, extra cost or burden of trying to administer a pets are welcome program, liability, which is one we hear a lot about, and I'll touch on, and the disruption or mess, perhaps, of animals, people not cleaning up after their pets. But it's interesting because as we were researching this issue, we found a study that talked about, or a survey of landlords. It was a survey of landlords, and it was talking about who causes more damage. Is it Fluffy and Fido, or is it the little children? How many of you think it's the pets? Oh gosh, no one raised their hand. You're right. So we found that landlords actually say that children cause more damage than pets. And when it comes to like the breed and size issue, I think this is a biggie, and this is one that we really want to try to overcome with some of the housing in the U.S. Because this is just a brief story. Diamond is the dog here. With the family, and it's a single dad with his 2 daughters, and Diamond actually rescued this family from a burning fire in their house. Diamond, the dad and one of the daughters got out. The other daughter was terrified and was hiding under a mattress in the burning house, and the dog stayed with her and barked and ended up having 30% of her body burned. And the family, of course, loves this dog. She's like the most amazing dog ever. And after this happened to them, they couldn't find a place to live. They were in the news. They got our award for being a hero dog. They could not get a place to live after their house burned down because she is a Staffy, a pit bull type dog. And so many places won't allow that because of either the breed. It's considered by a lot of property managers to be on their aggressive breeds list, or she was over the size limit for the apartment. They eventually figured it out, but it was amazing. And it got press too, which I think is a good thing. And the gentleman on the other side here is David and his dog Lola. They lived together for 7 years in their apartment, and suddenly he was told, I guess they finally noticed she was living there. They told her he can't have her. But he was able to be helped by some of our team, and we were able to share some information and help him navigate the landlord, and he was able to negotiate keeping his dog, thankfully. So there is some good news in that. But I think these breed restrictions and the weight restrictions is something that I find to be incredibly arbitrary. And because in my mind, it's the yappy little dogs that are far more disruptive than the big lazy couch potato dogs. And really every dog is an individual, right? So to make such blanket rules is frustrating. And when we've talked to the apartment association, we've talked to property owners, they don't really have a good reason as to why it is. They're like, well, this is kind of how it always has been, or we have this list of aggressive breeds that we're not allowed to accept on the property. And whenever we dive into that, nobody's list actually is the same, although sadly Staffies or pit bulls are on pretty much all of them. But they say it has a lot to do with insurance, and that's another thing we're trying to look into is how much of that is truly an insurance issue, because there are insurance companies in the United States like State Farm who don't have any breed restrictions whatsoever for homeowners or renters who have their insurance, and we have quotes from them saying it doesn't matter, we don't see any difference in our claims from a big dog or a pit bull or a Rottweiler versus another dog, which is great for us. And so we're going to try to use that as much as we can to try to influence the industry a little bit. So a couple of tips on how, maybe some ways we can start working on this issue. And I know it's a biggie, and it's one that's very new to me. Okay, I have 5 minutes. One that's new to me is sometimes it's just a matter of empowering renters and helping them kind of understand what their rights are. A lot of people panic when they get something that says you're not allowed to have your pet or you're going to get evicted. They just panic. They don't want to lose their home. They give up their dog. And we have found a lot of times you can kind of talk people off a bridge, and you can sometimes work it out. So just keep that in mind. And I think it's incumbent upon us to also help our pet owning public be the best tenants they could be. So maybe sharing information about, picking up after your pet, like you're ruining it for everyone else. And also then I think we have to keep having conversations with property owners, landlords about pets and what moving restrictions looks like. That there are things that they can benefit from when it comes to having pets in their properties, that, it opens them up to a whole new market. If in the US, 63% of the public has pets, and I think it's about the same here. So it's like that's 63% of the market share. If you don't allow pets, you're not allowing onto your property. You have narrowed your market share. Allowing pets more openly removes some of the issues of people hiding pets and causing more problems. And we had a lengthy conversation about this with the National Apartment Association, because they were really hung up for a while about, people faking their pets as either service animals or emergency support animals to keep them on the property. And they were like, how can we fix this? We were kind of like, well, you could fix it by just allowing pets and letting them do it legally. And it was really interesting because we had a whole discussion around it, and they were like, we hadn't really thought about that. So I think just having the dialogue with these folks is really important. I don't think we've ever really done this before, and I think it's an issue we need to address. Properties can move a lot faster if you allow pets. Some of the things you can share with apartment managers, and tenants do tend to stay longer if they have a pet because they know it's hard to find. So when they find one, they tend to stay put a little more stably. But also we can help pet owners to do their own homework. And we have a lot of this information online, which I'm going to show you the website in a second. But you can empower your community to put on their best face forward. And actually one of my staff, Kenny, who Todd mentioned yesterday is his brother from another mother. Kenny has a pity dog named Reuben, and he was trying to find an apartment himself and was having a really difficult time. So his dog is wonderful. And he finally was like, okay, he made up the pet resume, and he actually took Reuben into the rental office to meet with them. And they loved him. He was so well behaved, because they allowed pets, but not Reuben type pets. And once they met him, they ended up making an exception, and he and Reuben get to live in the apartment. So sometimes just kind of getting over that hump can help. I'm going a lot faster. So I've mentioned a lot of this. I'm going to skip. Okay, so this is the website that we just launched, and more information is coming on this. But if you want to check out, we have tips on here for renters. We have some information for property owners and landlords to consider. So if you'd like to take a look, it's a new issue. So hopefully we'll learn more and share it with you. And we're trying to tackle this at the Humane Society of the United States from a lot of different perspectives. So you'll be hearing a lot more from us on this over the coming months. And I'll just lastly, very quickly, give you a couple of key tips for things to think about if you wanted to create, taking aside the housing issue, kind of back to what some pet retention or pet owner support programs could look like. A few tips that you can think about if you want to go down this new road. I think some of the key things are, I love that, determine what you can offer. Figure out what do you have to work with. And it may not be a lot, but that's okay. Whatever you have can help someone. And develop your toolbox, partner with other groups. As you saw, those other organizations, the rescues actually set up shop in the lobby of the shelter. The shelter didn't even have to do the intervention. The rescue group took care of it. And in a way that was helpful, because as a government-run shelter, they couldn't waive a relinquishment fee. They were not permitted to. But the rescue group could pay it, and it still worked, right? So there's some creative ways you can work together to overcome some obstacles. And of course, picking the right people. Having really outgoing people is important. And on that same note, I think it's really important to if any of you are rescue groups that aren't sheltered, I would encourage you to kind of rethink your rescue in terms of is rescuing shelter animals on the back end the best way to save animals? Or what if we were able to do more pet owner support and invest on the front end so they never have to go through this system to begin with? So it's just something for us to really think about that is really compelling to me. Lastly, again, figure out what you can offer And some of these things are very simple. Having volunteers build dog houses, providing simply a toy, or finding folks who have engage a construction person to help you fix fences or build those dog houses. But most importantly, I mean, just as we said with the Pets for Life program and everything else, that being compassionate, listening to people, you want people who are doing this work who can relate to someone and be that support system. And that is the biggest, probably one of the most important factors in terms of successfulness with these types of programs. And tracking your statistics. If you do go down this road, I think it'd be so important, and it would help really build upon things if you could track what you're doing. Tracking the numbers of pets that are being potentially relinquished and why. And even surveying the pet owners, like, how do you feel? Like, you saw that data from Downtown Dog where they said, over 70% of people said they really want to keep their pet but didn't feel they could. Like, you wouldn't get that information if you weren't surveying it. So and that's really powerful information. So, and not only is that all good so that and can target your efforts, but it can be very compelling when you're trying to fundraise. So again, you don't have to go out and start a massive pet retention program. Even just starting small is fine. Anything you do to build on would be wonderful. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. Do what you can. And I'll just end on this. So how was that for a rush at the end? All right, I hope that helps. I'm happy to talk to anyone who has any questions. Thank you.
We have just got a little additional section now, in that we're going to ask Leslie Sanderson just to spend a minute with us. Leslie is the team leader of operations at the Animal Sciences and Rural Industries campus of Goulburn Novers and TAFE. TAFE are exhibiting here at the summit, and Leslie is here to have a brief word about the importance of education and training in our sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. It's a pleasure to be up here and with all these incredible people. I'm going to be really quick. I have a background in animal welfare and veterinary nursing and managed a welfare shelter for 4 years, so I know where you're all coming from. And just to hark back to what was said, my little good news story about stopping an animal coming into a shelter, one of my staff who had been trained, was a trained animal attendant, who really important person. We had an elderly lady come in with her son to surrender her little Pomeranian. She'd had a mild stroke and could no longer mobilise herself and had a scooter. The son was worried about the dog and said no, he had to relinquish. One of my staff went out and actually taught the dog to walk beside the scooter so that the dog could actually stay in the home. So it can be done, and you can start really small. But for me, look, education is the key. I've heard a couple of people here today, a couple of those wonderful animal advocates out there say, oh yeah, look, we're just an animal attendant. Please don't ever say that. You are the advocate for the animal out there. And training so that you can speak to the people out there is so important. You're the face of animal welfare. And what I really want to say to you is it doesn't matter where you get your training from. Yeah, hey, you can come and get trained by me, fantastic. But there is so much out there. Animal Sheltering magazine, look, subscribe to it. It is fantastic. There is so much out there for you to learn, and there are so many places that you can go and learn. Please go out there, learn, and become the advocate that you truly want to be. And that's it.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Leslie. Education is always a good thing, isn't it? So now we have some questions, please, for John and Betsy.
Am I on? I think I'm on, yes. Oh, hi. Thank you very much. And a question for Betsy. It's about the behavioural phone line, which I think is a brilliant idea. And I visited the Battersea Dogs and Cats Home in London a few years ago and did a behind-the-scenes tour and did an article about them. And they have a behavioural hotline as well, which has been brilliant for the UK and made a really big difference to them, helping people keep their pets at home, talking about their issues over the phone. That's something I feel a bit frustrated about here. I think we really do need this in Australia, and I remember talking to some larger animal welfare organisations here, but nobody seems to be willing to put their hand up and do it and provide the funding. So I was wondering, how's the behaviour line that you were talking about funded, and how do you get that set up?
Well, and just to be clear, the one that I was talking about was, at least the examples I was showing you was Nevada Humane Society, not my organization. And so I don't run a behavior helpline myself. We actually, with the Nevada Humane Society, I mean, I think it was something that they just decided needed to be a key part of their preventative work. And they were really wanting to create a no-kill or getting to zero community, and felt like helping to prevent surrenders was a key part of that. And so kind of shifting a little bit of resources, and I think fundraising around some of the results could be useful. But I think some of it too, if there's not a lot of I don't necessarily think, I know can be resource intensive, and I think this is where you probably need to figure out what you can offer and maybe what you don't have yet. You may not be able to hire a behaviorist to handle a helpline, but that's okay. Maybe you can, train a couple of volunteers to at least handle a few key issues, and the rest of the folks still have to bring their pets to the shelter or get referred to a behaviorist or whatever. But that's okay if you start small, and then you can grow over time if you can fundraise for it. Does that make sense? And I don't know. Do you have anything to offer? Oh, you don't do that. Yeah.
Well, it's as if there's several layers to that, I think is what you're saying. So,
Right.
So, if you're able to say, my dog keeps jumping over the fence, there may be a practical solution to that, just from someone with good general knowledge to be able to fix that.
Right.
Whereas my dog has a really difficult psychological issue that needs
Exactly,
help
and I
with.
think that's where it's like you can't let perfect get in the way of good. I mean, doing it's like a big collaborative thing would be fabulous. I think absolutely great, but you don't necessarily have to do all of that. Even if you just on your website say, if you're thinking of giving up your pet, please give us a call before you do, because maybe we can help you. Yeah. And then they can call you and you can find out what it is, and if it's something you can help with, great. If it's not, that's okay too, but at least you had the opportunity to have the conversation, right? It doesn't have to be a massive thing. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Okay.
Cool. Any next question over here?
Just while she's getting over there, I want to add, we don't do a behavior hotline in our shelter either, but on our website we link to, Betsy talked about all the cut sheets on the common problems. There's several organizations, HSUS, ASPCA, Best Friends, just simple one-pagers address this specific problem. Here's things you can do, and it can be as simple as just giving them that information and referencing it, not having someone that has to sort of walk them through and have a half-hour conversation, but providing access either through your website or, ask them to give you their mailing information and you just send it to them. So that's a sort of less active but cheap way to still accomplish some of the same goal.
Cool. Thank you, John. Yes.
Hi, this is a question for Betsy. Have you got any services in place for animals being surrendered because of domestic violence? Domestic violence is on the increase here in Queensland. It's just an epidemic, I think, at the moment. Quite often these people can find refuges but will not take animals, take the kids but not the animals. They can't afford boarding. The animals aren't normally vaccinated, sometimes aren't desexed. So they surrender as opposed to putting them into sort of temporary care. Have you got any facilities or any solutions to that?
Yeah, that used to happen in the U.S. a lot. And over the years, it's gotten much better. A lot of, for one, a lot of shelters will offer like a domestic violence safe haven. So the animal can come there and they will make sure it's secure while the woman or man, if they're being abused, are receiving services. But also a lot of states are passing more legislation to require that pets be allowed to go with a person to that domestic violence support. And it's sort of like the same, a similar issue, well, it's not a similar issue, but another issue is like in disasters. People used to be told, leave your pet behind, or you have, and now it's like law. If you want to be able to get federal funding to help plan for disasters, you have to incorporate pets into that plan. So it's like starting to make pets part of every social service, and that they are part of the family, and that we have to allow them to tag along in some way becomes really important. But anything you want to add on that as a government agency?
Yeah, a lot of them do, as Betsy said, they do offer that service, usually at least temporarily, because typically in our country, say a woman goes into a battered shelter, into a shelter to get away, the shelter doesn't allow the pet so there'll be some temporary amount of time, say 10 days or something. They'll say, yeah, we'll hang on to it free. It's not going to cost you anything. Figure out your housing, family member or whatever you're going to do, and then come pick the pet back up. Seems to work really well. Most people don't leave their pet behind. I mean, there's a reason why they're reaching out because, really two reasons. One, of course, they're very bonded with the pet, but also sometimes they fear for the pet itself. Domestic violence can include torturing or harming the dog so that you can emotionally harm the human, or threatening to do such things. So the dog can be in or cat can be in some very real danger itself.
Okay. Any further questions on that? Yes.
Can I make a comment on that? I actually run a private shelter called Happy Paws Haven, and we're in a very sort of poor social economic area called Grafton. And we have a lot of people who come down from Queensland as well as locally who go into refuges, both male and female. And we offer a 20-day free board for their animals if they're cats and dogs, if they're in a human crisis situation. We work with the two big refuges in the area, and we also work with the hospitals, with community care, and we also work with the Aboriginal communities in our area. And we probably only have, 5 or 10 dogs or cats per week come in, but we have them in a separate area. We do vaccinate them and chip them ourselves, and we try and raise funds for them to be desexed if they are not desexed. But we do offer that, and it's something that we work with community services on. We don't get a grant for it, and one day maybe I'll get round to that, but it's something that a shelter could do quite easily, is to have just a separate area. Mind you, I am on 100 acres, and we are using a converted stable for this process, but it is still a large shelter in terms of the room that those dogs have, and it's mainly dogs more than cats, I must admit.
That's a good advice then, isn't it, for anyone else that's thinking of opening that dialogue with these agencies?
If you could, I mean, the refuges love you. They can ring you and ask for advice. You can get foster carers quite easily to take an animal for 28 days, up to 28 days. And people will contribute because it is a community service. It's something that people are doing for families in need, in crisis.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that contribution. Any more questions? Jackie, yes, that's just coming behind you.
Thanks. This is, it's not a question, but it's just a bit of information that, in response to John's talk. Two things that I've heard about that have been associated with government contracts that are obviously not advantageous either to the organisation or to the animal. One, they had to refund the money being paid to the government for every animal that went to a rescue agency. And two, and these numbers you're a little bit old now, but if a cat was deemed feral, it could be killed on entry to by law, and they got $78 for that. But if it was not deemed feral, it had to be kept for 8 days, and they only got $126 for that. So what do you do if you deem most of them feral because it's more economic? So just be aware, as John said, thinking very carefully about the contracts that you're entering if it's good for you and good for the animals.
You definitely need legal advice, I think, in those situations. Perhaps one last question, Leslie, before lunch.
I just wanted to ask, the dogs that were saved, or the statistics, how do you know that they weren't surrendered to another shelter?
That's a good question. I know that I can't 100% tell you. I need to find out exactly what kind of follow-ups they're doing, but I think at least I can tell you from our experience with Pets for Life And I can talk about that when we've gone in and we've helped someone to be able to provide that kind of information, they're so grateful. And they always wanted to keep the pet to begin with. A lot of times, again, people are showing up at the shelter because they think it's their only last resort. Maybe there's a few of them who eventually still have a problem and take it to another shelter, although I think that'd be very few and far between, especially since they know now where to get help.
Okay. Gabrielle, one last word. One last word.
This might not be a quick answer, but I have a little bit of concern. So as a behaviourist, and I see clients bringing animals to me because they have behavioural problems. And when I look back at the history of some of these dogs, I've actually seen them before. So they've actually gone from a shelter to a foster carer, perhaps to a home, and it's not worked out, so they've got it off to another rescue group, and that hasn't worked out, and I had them go through 3 groups. So that actually concerns me, that following through the outcomes for these animals and how we actually track that. I guess also that every group is going, yep, we rehomed one, we rehomed one, we rehomed one. So they're all getting their stats up, but actually the outcome for the animal's not all that good. Would either of you like to comment on that?
I mean, it's a challenge. The behavior stuff is challenging, right? And I think, in terms of what's happening, in our best interest, it's to keep the animal where it is, right? Because that process of being, are you talking about more of like the in and out, the same dog going in and out, in and out? Yeah, so it is, and that's part of, again, about like, are we trying to rescue our way out of it, and what's causing that dog to keep coming back through? And is there something that could be done to solve the problem? And sometimes it may take some significant behavior modification that people aren't prepared to do, and that's is that what you're referring to? Sorry, I want to make sure I understood your question. Okay. So I don't necessarily have an easy answer for that, other than, again, I think it's all about owner trying as much as we can to provide owner support. And if we could have connected that person into you first, maybe we would prevent the rehoming and rehoming and rehoming.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much to Betsy and John for your presentations this morning, and we will see you back here at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much.